Hello and welcome to another episode of the Burnham Brothers College Football Podcast. Before we get started with our guest Jason Staples today, where we're going to talk a little bit about Florida State and then get do a deep dive into North Carolina, we do want to thank Ascension Sports, the Burnham Brothers College Football Podcast, brought to you by Ascension Sports, where elite athletes rise above the noise. Whether you're navigating NIL deals, building your personal brand, are preparing for the next level, Ascension Sports provides tailored consulting to help maximize every opportunity on and off the field, from recruiting insight to pre-draft prep and everything in between. Learn more at ascensionsportsconsulting.com. All right, Jason, with that, we'll welcome you in. Shane, how are you doing today? We got Jason Staples from inside Carolina. He actually went to Florida State, played football at Florida State. So, Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's really fun to be here, and I will say, played football is a little on the exaggerated point. I was more of a practice dummy, but you know, I will say I was the best dang practice dummy they could have out there, and most willing cannon fodder that they had for the time that I was there.
Yeah, I know you and I. Go ahead, Shane.
It's a pretty stacked roster you guys were a part of when you were at Florida State. Some pretty good teams.
Yeah, now
I had a Hall of Famer, I think, in front of me.
What years were you at Florida State, Jason?
So I got there in 2000, in the summer of 2000, and then I was on the roster officially in the spring of 2001 and then through spring of 2002. So really more 2 springs plus the mat drills of both years, and then summer conditioning and so on, and then I was basically a utility replacement option beyond that. So about as little participation as you can realistically have over a 2.5 year span and still have put on the uniform and stepped onto Doak in scrimmages and such. I did run with the ones for one scrimmage though, and that just meant that we didn't do much offensively that scrimmage.
Well, at least you had the pleasure of 2 off seasons worth of mat drills.
Yeah, and I got the original ones. Sadly, I was there the day that that Devon Darling was carried out and died, which remains one of the worst days of my life. And I think that's a day that left a deep scar on everybody who was a part of that program at that time, and actually on the program itself. I think that day, probably more than any other day, changed the Florida State program. I mean, you can kind of look at everything before Devon Darling's death and after Devon Darling's death, and a lot changed. And a lot needed to change, but some of the things that also changed, I think, really also impacted whether or not Florida State could be as successful doing what they were doing as they were before, and they were not as successful after that.
That's really interesting. I've never thought about that, but you know, a lot of people talk about maybe the change on the offensive side of the ball later in his time here, but yeah, I remember the day that happened, being shocked, and there is a trust that's broken. Looking back on it, you're exactly right. I'm sure that's much more impactful than I even gave it credit for.
Well, and the other thing that people may not always realize about this is it wasn't just impactful because one of us died, and you know, and how that all happened, but he had a twin brother on the team.
Yep.
And what we all watched as his twin brother was panicking and screaming at the coaches in the locker room and all this, none of us will ever forget that.
Yep.
And the what that did in terms of trust between players and coaches and the way that all that worked out, that I think had a massive impact on the next year, and I think then on the program forward. And obviously, like, that's more important than anything in terms of football and the success of football. So, you know, it almost trivializes it to talk about it that way. But sure. I do think that changed. That was the mark that was the moment when Florida State went from the dynasty era to the twilight years of the Bowden era. I think more than anything else. And I think they had enough talent on the roster, and with Jeff Bowden even at offensive coordinator, without that happening, I suspect that they would have been able to, that we would have been able to sustain more long-term success in the program for longer. But I think the trust broke down and a lot of things really changed there.
Yeah, listen, that's tough to go through. We lost a kid at USF while I was there, and I actually was down. I was looking for him. We were going to have him host a recruit on a particular recruiting weekend, and we had a guy that we had assigned to the kid, and we canceled. That kid couldn't do. He wanted to go home, so I was like, "Well, shoot, we'll get Keely Dorsey to do it." And Keely was a Tallahassee Lincoln guy that we got at USF, and so everybody's like, "Keely's in the weight room." So I ran down the weight room from the office, and when I got there, Keely had just collapsed. And it's something. A day I'll never forget. It's still when I think about it, I hate to think about it, but it's something like you said, Jason. You'll never forget it. Every time I think of Keely, you're such a bright kid and just a future gone way too soon. But so that's rough. I want to kind of move on. Let's go back a little bit more. Let's get into something positive now. I do want to tell. What are you doing now, Jason? So people, I know that obviously you've been coaching high school football for a while. You've got a lot of irons in the fire. Obviously, you're a doctor. Tell people about the wide variety of things that you're involved in now.
So, I mean, my day job is that I teach at NC State, and then I've got, the whole research program that goes with that, publishing and writing and doing all that work. And then, as soon as that's done, my other career, which has, sort of worked in parallel for the last, 18 years or so, has been covering both Florida State, basically since 2007. At one point, I actually was running the scout.com site for Florida State coverage, which then was consumed by 24/7 when 24/7 acquired Scout. But I've been doing that with basically just via podcast and a little bit of other stuff since then. And then covering North Carolina football for Inside Carolina, which we just switched over to the On3 network. We were with the 24/7 stuff, and then with 24/7 before, and then August 1st we switched over to On3, which is, we think, a better overall platform for what we're doing. And I've been basically the resident football analyst for Inside Carolina, breaking down X's and O's and scouting personnel and essentially trying to translate what's happening on the field in terms of, the nuts and bolts of the actual football, not the soap opera drama that, everybody gets really interested in with this, with, which recruit talked to what guy and, you got the box check, yes or no, all that stuff. I'm not worried about that stuff. But when it comes to what's happening on the field and why, and, why are coaches doing this, or why did the coach say this and then do that? That's the stuff that I work on, really for both, but for Inside Carolina as well. So that's really where I've been focused on.
Well, you've had a lot to cut through. Yeah, you've had a lot to cut through that was not football this past offseason with the hiring, and it's been an interesting cycle for you.
Yeah, before we get to the North Carolina and who's the most popular Jordan in Chapel Hill these days, and whether Pablo Torre has set up permanent residence in Chapel Hill, let's get your quick take on Florida State 2025, Mike Norvell, in what is a critical season. But what are your expectations? Obviously, you played at Florida State, attended school here. I don't want to dive into the weeds about it. We can bring you on for another episode of that, as we will do during the season. But what are your quick thoughts on Florida State 2025 and Mike Norvell, and what has to go right for them?
Well, I think obviously we just saw in the last couple of years some unprecedented stuff happen in Tallahassee. And again, I don't want to trivialize the severity of what happened with Devon Darling in terms of a man died. But you think about how unprecedented it was for what happened to Florida State after the 2023 regular season. That had never happened to a team before, where they were in position as an undefeated champion of a major conference and to be left out. And I think that left an enormous scar on the program. And I think, again, they had trouble as a coaching staff. They lost trust. And I think Norvell and the staff as a whole, they lost that team last year, which is a large reason why a good portion of that staff isn't there this year. And one of the things that's just fascinating to me right now is Florida State and UNC, are there two programs? Is there another program in the country that has more uncertainty about the upcoming season than those two programs about what to expect? I think those two programs might be the most unpredictable situation of anybody in the country. And I've got a close seat to both of them.
Yeah.
I was going to say maybe OU with Mateer, in the last 24 hours. But no, you're right. I agree with that too.
That does change things. Although I'd heard some rumblings about that. You guys probably had heard some rumblings about that going all the way back into December, that might rear its head. But in any case, there's your three, and we got two of them that we're talking about today. The thing that I do think is going to be interesting. First of all, Florida State has more talent than a lot of people, I think, realize is still on that roster. And I think they did a much better job of adding through the portal this time with a specific vision towards what they were going to be. I think last year they sort of panicked, and they added a bunch of guys that didn't fit well, that also didn't fit well with, culturally with the program. And I think they were more careful with their additions. I think this is going to be a team that sort of its upside is the 2022 Florida State team, which, had a running quarterback who came into the season with some questions about what he could do with his arm. But then he had some, dynamic players around him and a defense that was learning to really disrupt and cause problems. I think that's kind of your upside. That's where they could be. The downside is you open with Alabama. What happens if, Castellanos goes down in game one like DeAndre Francois did in 2016? Or what happens if things just go sideways and they get blown out in that game? How quickly do they start to doubt again? Now, most of these players weren't there last year, but still. So I think there's a lot of downside too. I think, you probably... I think they're going to be better than a lot of people think. I think that there is reason to think that with the vision that they have. I'm old school when it comes to football. Football is about winning the line of scrimmage and playing with great effort and physicality first and foremost. And if you can get a team that does that and does that really well and then protects the football, you're going to win more games than not. And I think they did a good job of basically getting some guys that are going to be able to do that. And the coordinators, Malzahn and White, they're not going to put up with a lack of physicality. That's the one thing I know about both of those guys. So I do think that you're going to see at least a team that's going to be easier to root for. Last year's team looked like they were going through the motions and didn't want to be on the field. This team, I think, is going to be a team that fights and claws. And I think that translates into, 7-8 wins probably on the downside and some pretty significant upside, but we'll see.
Yeah, Shane and I were talking about this yesterday. There's such a contrast in the attitude and demeanor of Tony White compared to Adam Fuller, who was an old FSU defensive coordinator. It was so refreshing to hear. Doesn't mean anything yet. No, it'll mean something when we see them get some adversity against Alabama and when toughness comes out. And but I'm looking forward to seeing. I agree with you on that. I think he comes across differently. He was clearly not pleased with some of the people that he thought should be playing better after their second scrimmage. So I think it's going to be a fascinating year. I would throw Colorado into that mix of schools. I don't know what anybody knows what to expect of Dion without Travis Hunter and Shador and Shiloh and a couple of the other kids they lost. But not to get, we go down that rabbit trail another day. But
another guy connected to Florida State historically. There's a common thread here. Maybe Florida State is just the source of unpredictability for a lot right now.
Yeah, Shane loves it when I work in Dion into the conversation, which I do about every time we have a podcast.
I've jumped on Dion's table since he got hired out there. As Pat will know, I've banged the Dion drum, and we've had that as a point of contention. But so far, It's trending well for me. It's trending well for Coach B over here. So.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes this year. I mean, he got a freshman quarterback and a lot of new faces, but hey, everybody has new faces these days. All right, so one last question about Florida State. We've had this conversation all off season. I've had it at dinner. I've had it over drinks. I've had it with Shane on this podcast. Do you think that there is a magic number for Mike Norvell this year? The closer we get to the season, first of all, I don't think there's any way they're going to be anywhere near where they were last year record-wise, but I think he's got at least 2 years unless something catastrophic were to happen. What are your thoughts on a magic number for Mike in 2025?
So, yes and no. I mean, I think it depends a little bit on how competitive they look in the games that they do lose, right? So they could win 8, like if he won 8 games, but they got beat by 45 by Alabama, 52 by Miami of Florida, by, 60 by Clemson, and then, finish the season with a 56-point loss to the University of Florida, there's going to be a lot of rumblings from people who have money to potentially pay that buyout. Now, I don't think that that's a likely scenario by any stretch, right? But I do think who you lose to and how does matter. So it's not just about the win-loss record. But this team, if they go out and they fight and they claw, and there's a few injuries here and there, and they, but they're competitive, and they go out there and they go 6-6, I think he keeps his job.
Yeah, I agree.
They go 6-6, and they lose to Alabama by 13 points. They lose to Miami of Florida by 6. They're competitive with Clemson, until the fourth quarter, and Clemson runs away by 24. 6 wins keeps him his job, I think. You don't make a bowl, and I think he probably loses his job. Because at that point, you're talking about more revenue lost. You're talking about... Because really, that's the thing. You've got a $50 million buyout. At what point does cutting bait actually make you more money by introducing the new coach smells so that you're getting more donations again, you're getting people renewing their very expensive premium ticket packages and box packages and things that then recoups that money.
I don't think it's all that.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think that's going to be an issue because I think this is probably an 8 or 9 win team based on if they stay even like average healthy. So that probably isn't an issue. But I think that's probably the number.
All right. Well, listen, we know both of you guys have limited time, so we do want to jump into North Carolina and get your thoughts on Bill Belichick and everything Tar Heel related. But before we do, we want to thank Todd and Scott Harrell from Home Instead. At Home Instead, their adaptable care plans give you the confidence of personalized help that's with you throughout the day. Even though we know there are plenty of things you'll still want to fly solo on, like finishing your daily Sudoku, or crossword puzzle. I can't say that word. Or trying Aqua Zumba or watching baseball or just generally hogging the remote. Home Instead will provide you companionship when you need it and space when you don't, all with a smile from qualified, compassionate caregivers matched to you. Visit Home Instead online for a better what's next at homeinsteadtally.com. Jason, I'm getting this live read thing down, buddy. It's not as easy as it looks.
Did you say drinking an Aqua Zuma, or was that Zima, or what exactly? Do they still make Zima?
No, they don't. Zima. They don't. White Claw is a new Zima.
Okay, Zima. There we go.
White Claw is a new Zima. I lose respect anytime I walk into a bar and see a man with a White Claw. It's
Bartles and James. I used to love the Bartles and James.
Or for that matter, a Michelob Ultra. I don't understand how people drink that. But no, I tried to say Aqua Zumba. And we're gonna move from Aqua to Tar Heel Blue.
Can I just
transition?
Yes.
I would like to suggest. Can we substitute Wordle for Sudoku?
Yes, because I cannot pronounce the word.
And water aerobics for Aqua Zumba. That's just 2 easier replacements.
How many 6-letter words have 3 syllables? I mean, that's hard. I'm from Alabama for the love of whatever. All right, let's go to North Carolina.
In Alabama, you can have 2-letter words that have 3 syllables now.
That's true. But all right, so my mind is in Carolina. Like James, what's his name? James Taylor. My mind's Taylor. I'm going to Carolina. All right, so North Carolina is the talk of college football with Bill Belichick. Jason, I know Shane's got some questions. Let's get into it. First of all, when they hired him, I listened. I listened to a lot of your podcasts over that period in December and January. I listened to about, I guess, every night for about a week, listening to you guys talk about it. Y'all did some really late night podcasts too during that time. What was your thoughts when you heard Bill Belichick? What was your thoughts when they actually landed Bill Belichick?
Oh boy, I'm probably going to get myself in trouble a little bit with this one. But first of all, when it became clear, and we knew a good bit before the official announcement, we knew that it was going to happen. Like it was already, you know how these things work. They already had an agreement in principle. Ink was not dry, so we couldn't report on it. So I'm just going back to once we found out, like, no, this is really happening. Because when we first heard, like, you know, they're talking to Belichick, it was like, okay, yeah, right. Well, you know, also Jessica Alba is going to be showing up at at my friend's front door and begging him to marry her or whatever. You know, that's great, but you know, that's not the way that this works.
I've had a similar dream.
So, you know, but once it became clear that it was going to happen, it was like, whoa, like that's a shock, a complete shock. But I have to confess that I was also a little disappointed because the other major figure that was involved in negotiation or involved in talks with UNC at the time was a guy I really like, a guy I know personally, and I really like and respect within the college game, and that's Matt Campbell. And I was very much behind the scenes actively rooting for Matt Campbell to become the head coach at UNC because I really like him. I respect him as a coach. I respect him as a man. And, you know, I thought he would be a great fit for a lot of reasons. And then, you know, you get Belichick and it's like, well, you know, I'm disappointed about that, but dang, like, can you really, if that guy wants to come and coach your program and you're North Carolina, like, can you really say no to that guy? Probably not. No. So, but then the next thing is you've got questions because he hasn't coached in college football. And we were talking about this off air. College and pros, it's a different game. It's barely the same sport. And so then the next question is, okay, how is this going to work at this level? How is he going to do this at the college level? What kind of staff is he going to hire? Is he going to hire guys that can actually coach in college? Is he going to hire guys that can recruit? Is he going to hire the personnel, you know, and support staff and everything necessary to run this the way that you need to run a college program? Though, again, they're trying to run this as the 33rd NFL team. That's their you know, catch line and all that. Mm-hmm. And there is definitely an aspect of that. But you can't exactly do things the way that you do them in the pros. There's certain limitations you have in college. So how much of that are they really going to be able to do, and how quickly are they going to catch on to that? Now, I mean, we already knew there was evidence already that he was, you know, pretty good at recruiting young talent. So that was less of a concern, I think. But I did have questions about whether or not he would be able to recruit talented young football players at the same level as some of his peers. Mm-hmm. And the results on that have been mixed so far, but I think mostly positive. But yeah, I mean, that was the initial reaction of, you know, there's a whole lot of unpredictability here of how this is going to work. And since they've been on campus, since that new regime has been on campus, more has clarified itself in a lot of those areas, but there's still a whole lot of questions about how this is all going to work out.
I think some people might think the transition's easier now, right? Because of the NFL allocation of college football with NIL and revenue sharing, but it is so different. You're right. It's a different game on the field. It's a different game off the field. You're dealing with young men versus grown men and families. Yeah, it's so wildly different. And even, you know, in what I do in the NIL transfer portal side of things with Ascension Sports, a lot of kids going in that process that were dealing with North Carolina in December with Coach Belichick in place, they had some concerns about, you know, just what that would be, how pro style it would be, and then how much fun it might be. And I know that goes back to the old Patriot, you know, winning is fun, but there was some of that when the kids were just talking about, you know, his ability to relate and do those things in the college space.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I think spring practice here really sort of alleviated some of those concerns, because they did, I think, succeed in getting in putting forward a culture that college players could buy into, and running practices in a way where those guys felt like they were becoming the kind of team that they're hoping to be. And you guys have been in this game on that side of things. You know this, that when you are a player and when you're an assistant coach at this level, and you really feel like what you're doing, you're starting to see the results and you're starting to feel yourself get better, and you're like, wait, we might have a chance to win. That is infectious. That is intoxicating. And I did get the sense that some of these guys have, come closer to drinking the Kool-Aid, as it were, of like, look, we're gonna get there. Like, these guys know what they're doing. Now, the concerning part is that the two of the 4 best defensive players that they had on the roster in the spring transferred out after the spring, which is exactly what you wouldn't expect, right? Yeah. One went to Ohio State, the other went to Penn State. And so there was some cultural stuff where certain guys had to kind of figure out whether they wanted to be a part of this program or do something different. And some of it also came back to how and again, I don't want to say too much and kind of get into trouble here, but some of it also comes back, from what we've gathered, comes back to how the front office side of things works. And that's less Belichick and more Michael Lombardi. So when you're talking about Lombardi as the general manager of the program and sort of the front office side, handling a lot of the numbers and the roster building and all of that, I know, for example, they brought in a quarterback from Penn State or from Purdue for the spring, and then he actually transferred back to Purdue after the spring.
College football in 2025.
Yes. Now, he got a lot of money to go to Purdue. The figure that I was told is he should be getting roughly $900,000 this year from Purdue if things go as predicted, and there's a couple escalators that could take him over 7 figures. Look, I mean, but what someone connected to that side of things told me was the feedback from him of dealing with of being at North Carolina was that he learned more in 4 months than he had learned in his entire football career prior to that. He's like, in terms of being coached, in terms of what I learned on the field, in the game, I learned more than I've ever learned in all the years of football I played before that. But there was also some dissatisfaction of how certain things were done on the front office side of things. And that's the part where in the pros, you have contracts where if you're dissatisfied with the contract that you signed, generally speaking, you can't get out of that contract very easily unless you're an absolute prime player who can hold out and kind of has leverage. And even then, your holdouts are kind of limited in terms of your leverage because of the way that collective bargaining works and all that. In our current state of affairs, you can't quite do those things the way that you could before. And when you start moving stuff around in ways that are unsatisfying for the player or the family off the field, that guy can just leave. And that changes the dynamics in ways that, again, that's the difference between college and pros. And I think they're figuring that out now and starting to get that as they move into the next cycle. I wouldn't be surprised if they had that more in order, but that's sort of where things are.
Yeah, I think that's probably one of the bigger differences in NFL. Those personnel issues are more black and white than they are in college football, right? So I think that was my question. And I remember talking to Shane about Lombardi, and I remember making the transition from college football and work for the AAF and Bill Polian. And those meetings in pro football are totally different than college, even league meetings, whatever you want, football operations meetings. But so how do you think what is basically year-round unrestricted free agency, and I know they're going to try to tie people into contracts that are 2 or 3 years, and you got to pay back, and I don't. That's Shane's area of expertise.
Good luck.
How do you think that will affect Belichick's long-term stability at North Carolina and having a guy like Lombardi lead that process in player personnel? Do you think he needs to get maybe somebody with more of a? And I'm not saying there's any issue. I'm just saying, you think are there any voices inside that player personnel department at North Carolina that have been in college football?
So from my understanding is that there really aren't, other than some of the assistants. So Steve Belichick has been in college recruiting as a coordinator for a little bit. So you do have some college experience on that staff and some guys that actually have a voice that, Bill Lombardi are going to have to listen to. But from what I understand, I mean, it's basically Bill and Lombardi's show. And in certain respects, Lombardi has a lot more rope than you'd kind of expect. In terms of how much autonomy he has to handle certain parts of certain details on that front that are just up to him. And again, college and pro are different. I also think that they made some mistakes early in the process. There were some guys that they I think expected to get, partly just because it's Bill Belichick. You're a defensive player. You're going to play for Bill Belichick, obviously. One of them actually is a defensive end that wound up at Florida State. Jason Jenkins. He was a guy that visited North Carolina first, and they were. I mean, I think he was probably the top guy on their board, from what I understand, at that position. They were, I think, completely convinced that they were going to get him, and from what I understand, he kind of left unsatisfied with the experience of, okay, they don't have all their stuff together at this point in that program. And he felt like he was going to be able to go to somewhere where, the organization was a little bit more mature in that respect, which is crazy that he wound up at Florida State given what happened last year. But that was one where it was a good example of a guy that I think would have fit really well into what they do, what they want to do, and in an area where they had some weaknesses, and they missed on that guy and 3 or 4 other guys that I think they really needed to get. And I think the sort of immaturity of the front office sort of setup as they were putting things together at that point hurt them some. It's moving forward. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not that changes this next cycle.
It's interesting to hear you say that, and dealing with some of the different schools I dealt with, I'll call them blue bloods, brand names of college football. In a lot of cases, I do think they saw their brand as a value, right? And we should get a discount here, so to speak, if we're recruiting you. There was a mindset to that. I won't name schools, but there was that, hey, because we are who we are, you should come here for less money. And I think in some cases, depending on who that school was and the situation and the recruitment, there is value in that. I do think, you could say, hey, if you go to North Carolina and Bill Belichick ends up playing the heck out of you and scouts are coming through there, that there's a long game to this. So I think some schools do take that approach, but you're right. There's a pivot. There's the markets. There is not a market, right? Sometimes it's really surprising in these portal recruitments where it goes in a hurry.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I mean, North Carolina very early just presumed like Belichick has the brand name. You're going to play for Belichick, right? And you had the Saban discount at Alabama for years, and Kirby has had the Georgia discount for a while. Georgia doesn't pay as much. I'm going to name a couple names because I know some of them, but Georgia doesn't pay as much for most of the guys that they get in those contexts as a lot of the peer programs that are recruiting against Georgia, because they can basically walk in and be like, "Look, do you want to play for Georgia or not? Like, is the extra $50,000 or $100,000 on a package that's already $750,000 really going to be worth that to you, or do you want to play for a national championship for Coach Kirby Smart?" That's what they're doing. And I think North Carolina, initially kind of felt like they'd be able to do that in a way that they couldn't really do, at least this cycle. Mm-hmm. That the Belichick name would outweigh some of these other factors, and they had to kind of pivot. And I do think they added, they definitely recruited inside out, which I really believe in. You have to, again, I'm old school. College football, as all levels of football, is won from the inside out. You better control the line of scrimmage. You better be dang physical and play hard. And I think they did find ways to get some guys who are at least going to be average or better on, at some of those key spots on the interior, which, has been a weakness for them in recent years.
Yeah, you look at their, at least if you look at their two deep and Lindy's, you got 6 guys combined on both sides of the ball that were starters for him last year. Totally rebuilt roster. You talked about the quarterback from Purdue. He left. So they go out and get Gio Lopez from University of South Alabama, famously bring in Bryce Baker, the 5-star quarterback there from North Carolina. Let's get into it. We got about 10 minutes left. What do you expect on the field? Who are they playing with? 5 new offensive linemen, really new people everywhere. This is a new staff, new personnel for the most part. And I've got the schedule up there. Kind of what are the strengths of this team based on what you've been able to see so far? What are the weaknesses, and how does that end up playing out over the course of the next 15 weeks?
Yeah, that's a lot to get through in 10 minutes, but I think, I think first of all, I think they've built a roster that has some physicality to it. So this will be a different kind of North Carolina team from what we've seen basically in my lifetime. Right? I mean, what's the first word that comes to your mind when you hear North Carolina football? If you've been in college football for a long time, well, soft, finesse, right? It's the first thing, right? Everybody knows this.
I was going to say wine and cheese, but okay.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, well, it's Sam Cassell for basketball, but yeah, it still applies, right? So, but the soft baby blue, program, they are going to be a more smash mouth team. Freddie Kitchens offensively, what they did is they went out and they got a bunch of big offensive linemen, and they're going to try to pound the rock with some big backs. They've got 3 backs that are 215, 220 pounds or above, and they're going to try to pound the rock. They got a quarterback who Gio Lopez is 220 pounds and kind of rocked up as well, and he's going to run the rock like a tailback. Concern with him is that he takes way too many big shots. You've got to learn to protect yourself better as a quarterback than he does. But they're going to run the football, they're going to run the quarterback, and then they're going to try to get some shots downfield, and they've got some talent there in terms of on the outside, some receivers that could present some problems for teams. So I think they actually have a chance to be sneaky good on the offensive side if Lopez actually pans out well for them. One of the downsides, they just lost their best offensive lineman until October to a broken foot in camp. He's a guy that's Austin Blasky. He's the returning starter at center.
Okay.
And he's a guy that actually could play all 5 spots for them. And his versatility was allowing them to really mix and match to find their best 5. And it might have been him at guard with the transfer Christo Kelly at center, and then somebody else at guard, and then, your 2 tackles. But maybe you slide him out at tackle, which is, definitely not his best position, but he might be your best tackle at that spot. Maybe, he's at center because you can't hold up against the best teams when Kelly's at center and he's a little light in the butt. Maybe you rotate a little bit, and maybe against one team he plays center and you do different. So they were planning on doing that with him, and then he went down with a broken foot, which is going to limit them in terms of some of what they want to be able to do up front and how much they're going to be able to get physical with teams. But I do think they've got about 8 guys that they can trust on the offensive line, 7 of whom are 315 pounds or above. They're big. So they're going to, I think, be sneaky good on the offensive side, but they're going to operate, I think, at a slower pace to kind of maximize, to keep certain games close when they're playing against more talented teams, and try to be efficient rather than fast. And I think they got a chance to do that on the offensive side. The real question for me on this team is on the interior of the defense. I think they're thin. If they lose one of their core defensive tackles, this season could get kind of ugly in terms of teams being able to run the football on them on the interior. And they've got a couple guys that they're arriving with some their transfers in, and they're arriving with some possibilities, with some upside on the defensive line and in a couple other places. But you just go, okay, well, the upside is there, but they're really banking on that upside. So I like some of the edge guys they've got. I think their two corners are probably top 3 in the conference as bookend corners. So they've got some pieces to work with, but my concern, if I'm coming into the season as their coaching staff, and I've heard some rumblings from their coaching staff going back to December, or actually no, going back to January, February, they were saying like, look, the big issue is going to be stopping the run. And to me, you never really want to bank on a team that can't stop the run. So that's really the question. That's what kind of team they're going to have. They're going to be trying to smoke and mirrors their way to stopping the run and forcing teams to have to throw on their corners, basically.
Yeah, I didn't realize they had DeAndre Robinson there, the kid that signed at Texas and went to Florida. And
then went to Florida.
He's on his 3rd program. Look at the schedule real quick. At face value, to me, Jason, it looks pretty favorable. Who knows what you're going to get in TCU? One year they're playing in the national championship game. The next year they're getting spanked by Deion in Colorado. Then you got at Charlotte, which is weird to me. Then you got the Spiders, so watch out for those Spiders. Then you got a UCF program that's kind of on the rebuild. Clemson at home. At a Cal program that's got a power struggle going on between the head coach and the general manager. Virginia fighting for their job. Syracuse supposed to come back to the pack. Shane, go ahead.
It's a great schedule. Are you kidding me? I mean, Jason, I think if I'm Bill Belichick and I roll out year 1 to this schedule, I think it's
this is a tailor-made schedule to outperform the quality of your team. I'll just put it this way. Let's think about this. If you took 2025 Florida State and you put this schedule in front of them, what do you expect their record to be?
Really good.
That's right.
I mean, 2025 Florida.
I don't like I do this year.
But this year's Florida State team, if you gave them that schedule, I think you probably put them at 10 wins, maybe 11.
I don't know if I can argue that fact. I think you might be right.
I mean, this is a very soft schedule. If you beat TCU in the opener, look, you got to think that Belichick and staff are not going to crap the bed against Charlotte and Richmond, right? And you've got enough talent to be able to run the football and control the line of scrimmage against those guys. Then you get a bad UCF team. Now that's on the road, but you could get to the Clemson game 4-0 without really, like, that's completely plausible. Now, I think you're probably going to be an underdog at home in that opener to TCU, but, they've not been good in openers.
Right.
So, maybe you're 3-1 or 4-0 going into Clemson. Now, I think that Clemson team's really dang good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you probably lose to Clemson, but that's a home game. And, Clemson has been vulnerable here and there. I mean, they came within a point of beating Clemson in Mac Brown's first season at home, and that was a really good Clemson team. So, but that's the one game where you just, put that down as a loss. Fine. But then you have the dregs of the ACC for the next 2 months.
Yep.
Cal, UVA, at Syracuse. Stanford might be the worst team in the Power Four, and they just had to replace a coach. They're running on an interim coach with Frank Reich this year, who has explicitly said he plans to be the coach for 1 season. Like, how do you the motivation there, and what are you fighting for? And then you got at Wake, Duke, and NC and at NC State. You got your 3 in-state. They don't leave the state of North Carolina in November.
Yeah,
I mean, this is a soft schedule.
You get off to a fast start, the belief, all that stuff. You get the snowball type, years where, you believe things are going to happen. To me, it just sets up really well for these guys, and I think it'll be fun to watch.
This could be a 7-win, 6-win quality team that winds up having 10 or 11 wins. I mean, I would not bank on this team winning 11 games. I think they've got too many gaps and too many places where injuries happen in college football. And,
right.
To me, for a team to win 10, 11 games, they either have to stay really healthy or they have to be really deep.
Right. Yep.
And I don't think that they're going to be really deep at a few key positions. So you kind of have to bank on, they'll probably drop a game there, maybe there because, these 2 guys get hurt or something like that. You kind of have to bank on that. But, this is probably, if they swapped with Florida State, they're losing the 4 elite games that Florida State plays.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're probably losing 1 more, maybe 2 more at minimum. That's probably a 6-win team against Florida State's schedule, but it might be a 10-win team against this schedule if they stay healthy enough. So, and I think that TCU game is really going to set the table for the season. They win that TCU game, I think 9 wins is probably in the cards.
Well, I'm always skeptical to ask this question because I know the answer for the most part. What I can only imagine how fired up the fan base is for the TCU game. What are the fans' expectations for this year, knowing that they're usually everybody thinks they should go undefeated. Every team in the major college football thinks their team should go undefeated. What are the fans' expectations, and what are your realistic expectations for compared to the fans?
Yeah, I there's a range because you have the sort of old school North Carolina fans who are like, I'm ready to be hurt again. It's like, yeah, pinch me because Bill Belichick is coaching my team, and obviously it's got to be better than it has been, but like, I've been hurt so many times before. Like, when's Lucy going to pull the football out? So you got that kind of 25-30% of the fan base. It's like, I'll believe that we're going to be really good when I see it. And then there's a lot of sort of cautious, like, this is a really easy schedule. And with Belichick, like, they're not going to just go out there and just lose to bad teams, are they? I mean, you should at least, punch at or above your weight with a really good coaching staff. So, there's a lot of optimism. I would say that the average fan kind of expects them to win 8 or 9 games.
Okay. And
then, of course, you have the delusional diehards who are like, look, there's a real chance this team beats that Clemson team, and then, this is going to be a playoff team now. I'm telling you, you all are doubting. You're doubting the Carolina Blue, but when we get to November and we spank that, Wolfpack, insert expletive, the way that we should have the last few years, because Chapel Bill's going to do his thing. Well, everybody's going to know, and we're going to go into that playoff. Nobody expects them to go beyond that, but there's a bunch of people. There's that 10-15% that are like, look, I think they really have a chance at the playoff, and I don't think that's really that realistic. I think even if this team did go 10-2, which is I think kind of the top end of expectations, I don't think 10-2 against that schedule necessarily makes the playoff.
Okay,
right? Unless you beat Clemson. So, right, but I think 8 wins is probably a good, 7-8 wins would be a successful first season in Chapel Hill for Belichick in my view.
I know Shane's got to go. I got one last question for you. All right, let's just assume that they exceed all expectation, go 10-2. Or let's assume that they don't, they fall below. What is the long term? Let's focus on the positive end of this. If they get to 9-3, 10-2, what can Bill Belichick do with this program? And whatever his long-term tenure would be, whether that's 3 years, 5 years, whatever it could be.
So I think, first of all, Belichick is looking at this as a 3-year job. Just personally. I don't have any inside track on that, but I think Belichick is looking at this as this year is building block year, and he thinks he can contend in 2026 and 2027. And I think sort of the hope, again, if I'm reading sort of how he probably is thinking, I suspect that he would want to hand that job off to his son after 3 years. And honestly, if I had to guess, Belichick would love to go to the NFL after that 3rd year and be able to pass Shula for the wins record. But I think this is one of those where if they go out there and they go 9-3, 10-2, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with on that transfer market next year. And they've already got a few pieces that they're guys that they brought in with, 2 years or 3 years that are high ceiling players. And if they hit on a couple of those guys, and you mentioned DeAndre Robinson. You mentioned DeAndre. He's one of those guys that has a higher ceiling, but the floor is pretty low too. He's on his 3rd program for a reason.
Right.
If they go 9-3, 10-2, there's going to be a bunch of people that are going to want to join that party in Chapel Hill, and that's going to be a very, very dangerous playoff contender in 2026 and then in 2027. And I think, again, after 2027, the man's almost 80 years old.
Yeah.
Right? At that point, he's pushing 80. He'll be 77, I think, at that point.
He's 73 now, right?
Yeah, I suspect that's when he starts to look at, do I want one more year in the NFL? Would you hire my son to kind of keep the party going? There's a variety of things that would go there, but I think that's kind of what the hope is in Chapel Hill.
Well, the good news is if it doesn't work for him, he can always start a dating service and give advice to guys in midlife crisis. So,
first of all, make tons of money, enormous, obscene amounts of money, winning 8 Super Bowls.
Yeah, money and being a football coach don't hurt you at all on the dating scene. All right, I know that I know you got to go, Shane, and I know Jason,
I do.
You had limited time too. But before we go, first of all, we'd love to have you back during the season. We'd love to have you back probably the week of the TCU game. Get a little for a much shorter segment. Obviously, we don't want to have an hour with you every time. But where can people go to get your content that want to learn more about North Carolina and your take on the Tar Heels?
Well, I'm not hard to find. So Unconquered podcast for yeah. Unconquered. You got it back to Dion once again. I'm impressed. You managed to do this all so often. It's really impressive.
Jason, I am already ready for prime time, buddy.
Oh man,
I'm not going to use all of mine today.
Oh, gosh.
Legendary.
But yeah, so for the Florida State side, Unconquered Podcast, unconqueredpodcast.com is the easy place for North Carolina stuff. Inside Carolina is your source for the best North Carolina coverage. That whole group that I work with there is just so impressive. They do a great job. And then of course you can find me on Twitter /X at Doc Staples. Otherwise easy to find. Like I said, call me Primetime for now, or Primetime Junior on that. I'm not hard to find.
Well, hey man, it's been a long. Like I said before we got started, you and I have been conversing on Twitter for years. I'm glad we finally got you on. We hope to have you back. This is going to be Florida State centric to a point, but we kind of want to make this a college football podcast for anybody to jump in that loves college football. So we want to thank Jason Staples for joining us. Shane, I know you're late running to pick up the kids, so you go get that out of the way. And
I will.
I've got a 3:30 phone call myself that I've got to get ready for. So we want to thank everybody for joining us for the Burnham Brothers College Football Podcast with our guest Jason Staples from Inside Carolina. We want to thank Todd Harrell and Scott Harrell at Home Instead, Shane and the team at Ascension Sports, and then Dan Mowry and the Mowry Law Firm out of St. Augustine, Florida. We'll be back later on in the week go ahead, Shane.
Jason, I'm coming to the North Carolina TCU game. I'm up there for that game to watch our boy Melcart hopefully get after the quarterback. So,
that's right. He's yours. And he's a guy I really like. I like him.
Love that kid. So hopefully I'll be up there. We can have a cold pop.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us, Jason. We appreciate it as always, man, and look forward to having you on again. You're welcome anytime. But we will bug you if we don't hear from you. All right, guys.